Hi everyone, this is Erin, and today I'm going to try to recreate this wonderful piece of concept art by Eyvind Earle for Lady and the Tramp. And I'm starting off with my primary set. So I have all the primary colors. I'll talk about those in a minute. I have my yogurt lids for palettes, a flathead brush, and my little color mixing book. And I know that the first colors I have to start with are a mix between ultramarine blue, which is a warm blue, and a little bit of the cyan, which is a cool blue, and then white. And as a lot of people have mentioned in the comments of different videos, you use a lot of white when you work with gouache, and that's partly because I'm using the primary colors, so I don't have a light blue pre-mixed in a tube, so I'm adding the white to it. Also, white tends to bring even more opacity and body to some colors. So yeah, if you're using primary colors for the most part and you haven't bought every color known to humans, then you need white gouache. So I'm starting off here. I'm going to create 3 different blues to do the background gradient. I'll put up the piece of concept art in a minute so you'll be able to see what I'm working on, but I just wanted to have a nice close-up of me mixing in water so you can see how much water I'm using, how much paint I'm using, and I'm using a lot of, I'm mixing a lot. Like I take a lot of time really making sure that my pigments are mixed. I'm adding a tiny, tiny bit of red, and I think I even put a little bit of black in here just to deepen that color. Technically the complementary color to blue, to this color, would be more of an orangey yellow, but I wanted to, or it would be an orange, a reddish orange, but I didn't want to desaturate it too much. I just wanted to add a little bit of complexity and depth to it. So I added some of the red, a little tiny bit of black to bring it down a little in value. So it's a little bit of a shadowy blue that we're kind of getting at here. You can see I'm doing a test little swatch. So I've started to do this in my videos just to show you how gouache dries either darker or lighter depending on the color, usually darker. So it's a good idea to start with some swatches before you jump into your piece. And now I'm taking some of the mixture that I already mixed and I'm adding it to white, and I'll actually take quite a bit of that mixture that I had. And this way the hue that I'm using is consistent throughout the gradient. So this would be considered a monochromatic gradient, even though I did mix different blues together to make this particular hue. Now that I've made it, I'm really only adding white or black to it to make a variation, to make a tonal variation. So that way this, this gradient's going to be monochromatic. And I'm doing it in order. So now you can see on the concept art that top color will be the very top of the gradient, the top of the sky. And then that middle value, which is a higher value, it's lighter, will be in the center of the gradient. And then the bottom of the gradient where the water is, this is a lot warmer. So this is a lot of that ultramarine blue. And ultramarine blue is a warm blue, which means it's closer to red on the color wheel. And it's just a great transition from that cooler middle section of the gradient down to the bottom, because it really feels like water. You know, you can see that difference. So I guess technically this isn't monochromatic if we're being really strict about the term, because if we're being really strict about monochromatic, mono means one and chroma means color. So yes, this is monochromatic in that I'm using 3 different blues, but this bottom part of the gradient is a lot warmer of a blue. So there you go. And you saw I put a little bit of orange in, so that's that complementary color to desaturate the blue slightly, and mixing it with a little bit of water at a time, which I do with every color I mix until it's super creamy and smooth. All the pigments are mixed together. I've got my 3 colors ready to go, and I have some paint left on my paintbrush. So I'm just going to use that to block in the water, just to get that paint off the brush, because I don't want to waste any paint, but I will be using a much bigger brush to do the rest of the gradient. So the trick with a gradient is to work quick. Be brave, don't overthink it, grab your first color. You can go from top to bottom or bottom to top. I just happen to go from the bottom up. Doesn't really matter. But yeah, getting in there, getting my paint. You can see it's a little bit watered down, the first coat, and that's okay because you'll usually do a second coat. I've got my second color here, the middle of the gradient, and I'm working quickly. So the first part that I did, the water, it's still a little bit wet, so that when I put this middle coat over top, ooh, crumbs. I always have crumbs. What the heck? Crummy. Okay, so I've got the middle color now, and I'm going over very quickly so that it blends a little bit with that watercolor at the bottom. And that watercolor is still a little bit wet, as I mentioned, so it's, you know, you can blend the two. And then with the top color, crumbs, I am doing the same thing. It's a little bit more watered down than the second coat will be. And now we're ready for the second coat. So I'm going directly into this middle color now. And I think I chose to go middle because it seemed easier to me to work now from the middle to go up and down, and see how I'm going across, not too many times, but I'm smoothing it out. And when I am going over either the top color or the bottom color, I press down a little bit harder because a harder pressure will help those two colors to blend together. But then I go over it very, very lightly to make sure it's all smoothed out and getting rid of any extra crumbs. It's like Attack of the Crumbs every time. And then one last coat of the bottom color and blending it upwards. So I'm pressing harder and then lighter, and yay, I'm done. Perfect. Okay. Moving on. Now we're going to create the, what are we doing now? I think we're creating the grayish color for the foreground, for the part of the what am I trying to say? The land, not the water, the other part, which would be the land, the area of the park where the dogs are going on their stroll. And I have used the blue that I already had mixed, and I'm going to add a lot more black to it to create the gray, because the gray of the foreground is a bluish gray. The whole piece, we can say this whole piece is monochromatic. Yeah, we're using all different tones of blue. The only color in it is when we paint in Lady. So I'm just going to quickly give a little bit of trivia about Lady and the Tramp that I think is pretty hilarious. So Lady was given to a couple, or I guess she was given to the wife by the husband. I should mention first, this movie came out in 1955, and what I'm about to say is just so 1955, but so the dog Lady was given to the wife, whose name in the movie is Darling, and the husband is called Jim Dear. Jim Dear, which I remember her saying, I can hear it so clearly in my head, Jim Dear. Anyway, so Jim Dear gave Darling Lady. Oh, how 1955. So this is another gradient that I'm working on in this foreground, the park area, the ground. So similar to what I did with the sky, started with the darker color on the outer edge, drawing in that shape, painting in that shape. And then while it was still wet, I added in a lighter section in the bottom left. And you can see in the original piece there that the bottom left area is lighter. So now I'm bringing in this more shadowed color, this darker, which was the same color I had. I just added black and I think a little bit more blue. And working quickly, so nothing has completely dried yet, so that I can still blend it a little bit into that middle color there, and then to the lightest color. So see what I'm doing there? And it's blending nicely. Now, there's going to be a lot of stuff painted over top of this, so I like to remind my students when I'm working, one-on-one with people or in a Zoom session, that you don't want to worry too much about how perfect a gradient is, especially if it's a background gradient, because things are going to be over top of it. You're going to paint elements over it, so you won't really notice, but you'll get the general feeling of the color going from light to dark. It'll give it some depth. And speaking of my students, this piece was one of the pieces that I covered in my Zoom course that I just finished. So I will, at the end of this video, share some of my students' work. And the Zoom course was awesome. I had 4 students. We had so much fun. It was amazing. And my next session starts this coming Sunday. There's 3 spots left. So if anyone's interested, I'll put a link in the description below to all the information. Okay, so here we go. We're doing this background way off in the distance. You can see this line of trees. I love this silhouetted line of trees and how these shapes are quite gestural. They're not super specific. I noticed that some of the students in my class actually painted a much more realistic looking skyline. Like their trees were a lot more defined and tree-like. Whereas what I've done here, and I actually kind of prefer what they did, what my students did, but what I'm doing is I'm copying Eyvind as closely as possible. And when I really look at this piece, at his piece, it's a lot more non-representational. It's a lot more impressionistic, these sort of shapes way off in the distance. You know, they kind of almost look to me like a playground or something. Like they're strange shapes and maybe a bridge in there, whatever, but really fun to do because, you know, you don't have to worry about it being like perfect shapes, right? It's just this sort of weird, wiggly, gestural background. So getting that in. And I used the same color that I used for the foreground. I just added, again, I think a little bit more blue, a little bit more black so that it's slightly darker. And there you go, very quick. And I didn't worry about leaving the sort of little holes, the areas, because I did it after. So once it dries, once that background dries, I'm going in with a little bit of that same blue mixture, or my sky mixture, the one that I used for the gradient. And I'm just going in and adding these little sort of gaps so that it's not one solid shape. It just feels a little more, well, it's more like the original piece. There we go. And I realize now that I've been calling these replicants because it's sort of a nod to one of my favorite movies, Blade Runner, but they're called masterworks. This is kind of new to me. Someone mentioned it a while back, and then I just recently watched this girl on YouTube, and I'll link her channel in my description because she's great. She's like new to YouTube, this young artist who's making some really nice videos, and she did a masterwork in Procreate, I believe, to some mid-century work. So I'll link to her. But yeah, so we're making a masterwork. Okay, doing the little walkway. This is the path, and I start with a thinner line than what it will end up being, and that's a great thing for me anyway. It's a really helpful tip is start thinner, as thin as you can go sometimes when you're working on these very specific gestural details. Same with trees or hair. You know, if you're doing a thin sort of wavy line, start it really thin and then you can build it up. Because if you go too thick and you mess up the line and you have to perfect the shape, you'll just end up getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm sure a lot of you have experienced that before. Okay, so next up, we are adding in quite a bit of blue here. And I believe we're going to be doing, what are we doing? Even know what this part is. I think it's going to be the shadows. Yeah. What is this hot bluey black color? So more of the ultramarine, so ultramarine black, and I think we're going to be doing the shadow of the land. So we're adding, there you go, the shadow. So this time I've turned my whole picture plane downwards, and that's because these lines, these are shadow lines, shadows from the trees and other elements throughout the image. And I do the shadows first because I'm going to build over top of them with the elements that are casting shadows. And I want those shadows to be a little bit thinner on the end of them, right? Because shadows recede often and they sort of have a finer tip. So if I'm pulling downwards on the picture plane, it's just, I feel like it's working with gravity to help me get a finer tip. I don't know if that's actually, it just feels easier. So I always say, you know, move your picture plane, move your canvas around so that it's easier, whatever feels comfortable for you. You know, it's easy to move it around, so go for it. Okay, we're starting now with a new color. We're going to create the gazebo, and the gazebo is more of a sort of light turquoise color. So I've got white here, always using white, and I'm adding a little bit of yellow and a little bit of cyan. And remember when you're mixing to always mix into your lightest colors. So starting with the white and then mixing yellow and then cyan into that white will give you more control over the mix so that you don't waste paint, right? You just slowly mix into that white until it's the right color. And this is the first coat. I will do 2 coats. You can see it's a little bit lumpy, sort of streaky, but after the second coat, it's fine. And this is a little tough, you know, just winging it without drawing it in first, but I really think that's the way to go with these masterworks, especially, you know, if we're recreating concept art. Concept art is made so quickly, and I can pretty much guarantee that Mary Blair and Eyvind Earle, who did this piece, were not drawing these in. They were just going for it. So just go for it. Just look at that, you know, the original piece of work, see where the gazebo, those shapes, that kind of turquoisey shape, where do they line up with the trees in the background? Where do they line up with the top of the picture plane? And just sort of get a sense of where it should go and then go for it. So I did a second coat of the turquoise color after it completely dried. Always wait till everything completely dries if you don't want to blend. And now I'm painting in the gazebo. Love a gazebo. So this movie, as I mentioned, was released in 1955, and then it was re-released when I was a kid, sometime in the, I think in the like early 80s, late 70s, I saw it in the theater. And my favorite scene was this scene that I'm painting. It's called Belle Note, Beautiful Evening, and it was all done by Eyvind Earle. So Eyvind Earle didn't really work on any of the rest of the movie. He was asked to work on this scene in particular because Disney wanted the scene to feel different than the rest of the film, which takes place mostly in the city. So this is, you know, the date scene, the romantic scene of Lady and the Tramp walking through a park. And so Eyvind was in charge of the art direction of Belle Note. And when I was a kid and saw this film, you know, this scene just, I don't know, it really transports you to another world, a very romantic world. And I'm gonna blame this scene in part to why I was such a hyper romantic kid and still such a romantic. Like I'm just such a sucker. And I think it's seeing things like this as a kid, you know, and the magic of it, and just what can we say? How romantic it was. All right, but and now this is the 3rd time I've actually created a masterwork from Belle Note, and I almost feel like I'm living vicariously through these 2 dogs and their romance. I really need to go on a date. It's been a while. But anyway, so we're doing the classic Eyvind trees. And I say the classic Eyvind trees, but really he has so many different styles of trees, and they're all incredible. These ones are, you can almost sense that these are kind of at not the beginning of his career, because he had been painting for a long time. I mean, he started painting as a kid. I think his first exhibit was when he was 14, something like that. But these trees do feel a little less hyper stylized than the ones that he does, or that he did for Sleeping Beauty. But as always, you start with the trunk, and you start with a little more pressure on your brush, and as you move your way up the tree, you lighten up on the pressure and try to get a finer tip. However, I recommend using a number 4 brush. I'm using a 6 here, and although I do really love this new brush, this is my Princeton sable brush. It's a sable light. I think it's like fake sable, but yeah, it's a little too big, I would like to get thinner branches happening there. Excuse me, but it'll do. As always, I'm just like, it'll do. Which actually brings me to a point I wanted to make about the inner critic, because that's something that comes up a lot when I'm teaching at Emily Carr, the university where I teach, or even here through the YouTube channel. People make comments about, you know, how can you forgive yourself of making mistakes? And This inner critic that we have ultimately is there to help us. And for a lot of my adult life making art, you know, the inner critic would be like, who do you think you are? Who cares about your work? And, you know, your work is boring and it's passé and it needs a stronger concept. And there's all these voices. But ultimately, you know, I mean, therapy helps, but there's like a more kind of a gentler way to think about the inner critic instead of trying to shut it up. I think for me, it was like accepting that that voice is there to help me do better. It's there to help me do my best and to be, you know, constructively critical rather than just mean or, you know, sort of poking my shame wounds. So now I'm just like, okay, well, I'm not an idiot. My work is not passé. It is what I want it to be. There will be an audience for it, and I'm just trying to do my best, and that inner critic is there to help me do that. So yeah, embrace the inner critic. And now we're doing some dry brush. Practice your dry brush first. This is something I've said in other videos, is instead of going right into your piece, like do a little tester on the side. And I noticed here, I was like, oh, it's just, there's not enough paint on the brush. So I wanted some more dark marks along with those sort of lighter diffuse ones. So just getting in there, changing it up a little bit. I'm using a dry brush, but with a tiny bit of water. The brush isn't completely dry, but I do practice it sort of on my palette there, just getting off the excess paint and moving my brush around a little bit so that I don't get the exact same mark. And it's fun to do. It's like you can't really screw it up, which is a good feeling. I like when you can't screw things up. Okay, we're gonna put some shadows underneath our trees. And another thing to remember is there's always this phase, this stage of the painting where things look weird. Like look at the gazebo. It's at this point looking pretty strange, right? Just the roof sort of floating there in space. But as we start to add more of the details, like bringing in some of the shadow here, and then next we're gonna bring in some of the stairs and the other details, it really starts to make sense. Ooh, and there's the little, I think those are lily pads or rocks, right? This is a lagoon. I love a lagoon. There we go. I also love legumes. I love to eat legumes by the lagoon. Obviously, I've made peace with my inner critic or I would not be making these videos. Excuse me. Morning. I drink coffee in the morning and then I get this like gurgly, like acid refluxy thing going on. It's fun. Love it. Yeah, now the gazebo is coming together. So these, again, not perfect. They're a little bit wonky, but that's okay because we're getting the point across. I hope. Okay, more facts about Lady and the Tramp because there's so many here, and I do want to save some for future videos because I'm sure I will revisit Belle Note since I'm living vicariously through the love life of two dogs. Oh yeah, I was gonna say that the spaghetti kiss, so the famous spaghetti kiss scene where the dogs are eating spaghetti and then they kiss and it's a beautiful moment. That was, I think that was me trying to do an Italian accent. But that scene almost didn't make it into the movie. It's like the most famous scene, or one of the most famous scenes in an animated feature, and it almost didn't make it in because Disney was like, this is ridiculous, this is silly, I want this to be romantic, not silly. But the animator who was in charge of the scene, and I'm sorry, I don't have his name in front of me, but he made it very romantic, and then Walt was like, okay, that's pretty darn cute. And yeah, so it made it into the movie. And you know, it is what it is. It's a cute little scene. And the other thing that I was going to add is that Lady, the female dog, was named Lady because she had bad manners and she was man-like. That's what I read. So that is problematic on so many levels. Like, what is man-like? Like, so because Lady was a bit of a wild puppy running around and chewing on shoes and, I don't know, I guess being a cute little puppy brat, that she had bad manners. So it was a joke to call her Lady. Ahem. I think that's silly. Anyway, so, and the tramp was almost named Homer or Rags. My favorite is Bozo. It should have been Bozo. Yeah, Lady and the Bozo. Perfect. Okay, we just did the highlights on the on the gazebo, and it's looking pretty fresh. Everything's coming together. And now the glow of the moon. So check it out. I added quite a bit of water to my white mixture so that I can do this more transparent layer. So I'm making the moon first. Ta-da! And now I'm going to wipe off my brush. Doo-doo. Get it a little bit wet. So there's a little bit of white still on the brush, but it's not super wet. I've patted off the excess water. And now I'm blending outwards from that, from what I laid down originally. So that moon that I laid down originally was quite diffuse already, not super opaque, quite transparent. And now I've used a watery, clean brush to smooth it outwards and to create this moon glow. And I'm not like a master at this by any means. I'm still learning how to do this sort of a glow effect. I'm actually going to go into more detail about this with my Zoom class that's coming up on Sunday. That section, I'm saying that section because there was two sections. One just ended, the next one's starting on Sunday. And we'll be going over moon glow. I'm so excited. Anyway, so yeah, so the moon glow, after you create this transparent sort of blend, then you can go into the center and with less water, more paint, create a more opaque moon at the center. And so it looks like it's glowing. Ta-da! Very cute. I'm getting pretty good at painting circles. Sometimes it works better than others. And yeah, putting the moon glow on all these little pebbles, these little details throughout the scene that just add so much visual interest and get the eye moving around. And it mirrors also the stars in the sky that I'm going to put in next. So there's a lot of repetition happening in this composition, and that's one of the principles of design. Something else I talk about in my Zoom course. But the principles of design are great because if you follow them when you're creating a composition, you have a much better chance at making something that is visually pleasing, right? So things like contrast and a focal point and focusing on negative space so you don't have too much tension or you know, just all these little things to consider. And so putting in these ripples in the water and the highlights of all the little pebbles and then the stars, which I'm going to do next, I believe, that creates this lovely rhythm, this repetition and cohesion, and your eye moves around the composition and all that stuff that helps to make something more pleasing to look at. And the stars, I love painting stars. Stars are surprisingly tough to paint if you've ever tried to get a nice little dot instead of a short line. You know what I mean? You want it to look more rounded. So the trick here is, you know, make sure you have a lot of paint on your brush, that you've twisted the brush on your palette so that the paint has been sort of squeegeed to the very tip of your brush. And then you can deposit those little circles and you just very carefully sort of kiss your palette or your canvas. Mwah, there you go, kissy kiss. And then I don't know what else to say, just there you go, good luck. And stars, make sure they're kind of random, a couple of them closer together. I mean, of course, I'm working from a piece of concept art, so I can see where Eyvind put the stars, and I'm just copying that. But when you're painting your own stars, just remember, like random, but then little groupings of stars, and it'll look more realistic. And now we're moving on to the tramp. I'm painting the tramp. And I think, I'm pretty sure that's what we're doing now. I think we're painting the tramp. But I'm gonna start with I'm putting in a little bit of blue, a little bit of cyan, and that just helps to create, again, a bit more cohesion. Am I doing the tramp? I must be. Hey, yes, I am. It's so weird when I zoom in, the color changes. Like my camera picks up different colors. Anyway, it looks a lot warmer, but I'm doing the lighter color of the tramp. So this is I guess this sort of represents the moon glow, because then I do a darker gray over top of it. Yeah, I can't really tell you my reasoning behind that. I guess I thought it was easier to do it this way. But really simple shapes to make up this little dog. It's so cute. I love the ears. That's my favorite part, is the little floppy ears. Oh, it's adorable. I haven't seen Lady and the Tramp in such a long time, but in my head, his voice is George Clooney's voice. Why is that? I don't know if it's because of Fantastic Mr. Fox, which is one of my favorite movies. Oh, there's a butterfly outside. Wow. Focus. But anyway, I always think of George Clooney's voice when I think of the Tramp now. Okay, so then we're going to do the gray over top so that that first layer of white is really the moon glow. And yeah, so it looks like it's glowing off of his fur, or his fur is glowing. And there we go. And then the next part, the last part, is painting Lady. I think that was always she didn't have an alternative name. I guess she goes by, yeah, anyway, I'm going to stop there. This is the only color besides blue or gray or white in the whole piece. And we're doing a brown recipe, everybody. Brown mixture, if you remember from another video. I had a good laugh around the brown. But yeah, yellow, red, a nice warm red, a little bit of black, a tiny bit of white. And I think maybe I throw in a bit of cyan. Let's see what I do. I don't remember. This was like over a week ago that I made this. I don't think I've ever been busier in my entire life right now. I mean, every day is just nonstop crazy work, because I'm teaching many classes, but also I have an art show coming up in a few weeks, or at the end of August. My first solo exhibition in a gallery. So I'm really stoked about that. I might share more about that later in another video, but yeah, very busy. So forgive me for whatever. I don't even know why I'm asking forgiveness. Anyway, okay, here we are with Lady, last but definitely not least. And I put them very close together so that Tramp can enjoy sniffing Lady's butt on their date. Because I mean, that's like the perfect thing to do on a first date. Sniff butt. Oh, yeah. Look, I gave her an extra leg. So I have to erase it. So I wet my brush, I clean my brush, wet my brush, and use the water to clean away that extra leg. Maybe Lady isn't a lady. Oh, yeah. I'm glad we're at the end of the painting. Because now I'm getting weird. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this. I'm gonna start to wrap. Oh no, I have to make her floppy ear. Her ears are truly adorable. I mean, both of them have cute ears, but Cocker Spaniel ears, the way they flop and they're so pretty. She is a very lovely looking dog, I have to say. She's a pedigree Cocker Spaniel. I want to get a dog one day, but I probably will get a rescue dog. But if I was going to buy a dog, if I was going to spend the money, Cocker Spaniel would be in my list. It's on my list. I also really, really love Chihuahuas. I babysat a Chihuahua recently. I've had the pleasure of hanging out with this amazing dog, and literally the cuddliest dog I've ever met in my entire life. And I totally fell in love with this dog, and it's a Chihuahua, and I just didn't realize how much I loved little tiny teeny dogs that you can carry around like a baby. I need a dog that I can carry around like a baby. And here we are, all done. Yay, Belle Note, look at that. Ah, so romantic. I hope you enjoyed it, everyone. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't. And I hope you all enjoy your next date with a dog.